Hello, everybody. This is Dream, and today we have a 7-game Major League Baseball slate. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? It really helps the channel a lot. So we're going to start with our pitchers here. We have a pretty interesting slate here. We have 7 games. We do have a game in Colorado, which is obviously going to have a high total on it. Though it's not as high as some days, so to keep that in mind. I think San Diego's a great stack, but I don't think Colorado's a great one today. We also have one other high-scoring game, which is the Miami-Atlanta game, obviously because of Atlanta. With that said, the other games are all at 8.5 runs. Atlanta's a 9-run game, and that San Diego-Colorado's a 10-game run. We have one sole lower-scoring game, which is the San Francisco-New York Mets game, which is just an 8-run total on this one. But on a 7-game slate, there's definitely a lot of ways we can attack this one from a pitching perspective. It's going to be interesting. So I'm going to just go team to team and tell you what I like about the pitchers or dislike about them at least. So when we start with the Atlanta Miami game, so we got Bryce Elder and Ryan Weathers. Ryan Weathers is one of the worst options on this entire slate. He's got the lowest K rate on the slate, and he's facing Atlanta, so he's going to be a very avoidable player today. But Bryce Elder is a GPP play today, as Miami is not a huge strikeout team, but they are a team that don't score a ton of runs. And Elder was good last season against them. It's definitely a GPP only play, but he's not expected to give up too many earned runs today, and he should be able to get some strikeouts. He kind of is a little inconsistent strikeout wise sometimes, but he's a good pitcher, and I think he's going to have some upside here. He's also cheap, which is nice. He's one of the cheaper GPP plays on the slate, so I don't know, the pricing for pitching today seems like it was really off, but he's definitely cheap today. Toronto and Kansas City, this game does feature a good setup here of Singer versus Kikuchi. Now, I don't love Singer today. I do think he's a GPP play, but he's definitely contrarian. He's done decent to start the season, but this matchup is not ideal for him, and it looks like it's going to be a tougher game. He only has a 5 strikeout potential today, which is a little disappointing to be the most expensive player and only have that uh, 5 strikeout upside. And as you can see in the last few games, he's had 4, 4, and 5 in the last 3. Though he did start the game with the 10 strikeout game against Minnesota, he is capable, but this matchup is not super great for that. So I do think he's overpriced and probably not a super great play, but he is a GPP play on this one. In fact, all the pitching today, there's no like X factor pitcher that I think is just above everybody, but Singer is definitely one of the more contrarian options. Kikuchi for the Toronto Blue Jays is an interesting play today. Now, I do like some bets from Kansas City, and I do think a Kansas City stack is somewhat decent today. But Kikuchi has also been extremely good to start the season with 3 straight 20-plus fantasy point games against the Yankees in Seattle. I do think he's got a tougher matchup here, but I do think he's a viable option here. He also has one of the better strikeout rates on the slate, and he is capable of a 5, 6, 7 strikeout situation in this one. I do think that the Kansas City Royals do get at least a couple earned runs here, though, so I don't think he's a must play, but he's definitely not a bad one, and he's kind of one of those that I feel like in a gut feeling that he's going to be okay. For the Chicago White Sox and Minnesota game, now this game does feature Paddock versus Cannon. Now Cannon is a young pitcher who only has had 1 start so far, and he did kind of do okay against Kansas City. He had 12 fantasy points. He didn't have a lot of strikeouts. I don't expect a ton of strikeouts today. Of course, Minnesota is one of the worst strikeout teams, so he has a little bit more chance with that. But he's not a great play, even though he's dirt cheap. I don't think he's. I think he's somebody I'm probably going to avoid, and I do think there's some Minnesota bats that are definitely worth taking a look at. Looking at Paddock, he's actually a good GPP play today as well. As the White Sox are just a terrible team, they're not very good. Now Paddock isn't going to score 20 fantasy points, but if he can get 15 to 20 range, then he can pay off here. But he's kind of an extreme GPP. He's very close to being a GPP, but he did kind of, I think, with the total earned runs and his strikeout potential here at least in this particular game has some upside. But he's definitely worth. He's definitely very very risky. Looking at the Arizona St. Louis game, we do have 2 pitchers that are mid-priced here with Lynn and Paft. Now, Lynn does fall into an extreme GPP play today, as Arizona is a good team and a very stackable team most days. And while Lynn has had a couple of good games so far, he definitely carries some risks today. He's definitely an extreme GPP play. The thing that saves him a little bit is his strikeout potential, but he has been inconsistent from that so far this season. So I do think he is capable of a good game, but he definitely has a little bit of risk here on this one. Then we look at Paft for Arizona. Now, this is a favorable matchup for him, but he has pretty struggled so far this season. with in a couple games. Even against St. Louis already, he scored 4 fantasy points. The strikeout rate is a little bit of a concern against this particular team, and so I don't think he's a great play on this one, especially since he looks like he's going to go up some earned runs. He is an extreme GPP play, but he's definitely extremely risky on this particular slate, even though St. Louis is one of the worst, lackluster teams right now. I do think St. Louis has several guys that you could stack up on here. Looking at San Diego and Colorado now, this is obviously a game that's tough to want to utilize. So we'll start with Goomber first. Now, Goomber has been absolutely terrible so far at home, especially. He's if he gets over 10 fantasy points, that's a good day. He doesn't get very many strikeouts most times, and so this is definitely a situation where he's probably going to get blown up. Being at home is definitely a tough thing for Colorado pitchers and he doesn't have that much upside to begin with. So even when he's on the road, so I think he's a very avoidable option. Now, Case is a very interesting play today. Now he is a GPP play in this situation. It is tough because it is in Colorado, so to keep that in mind. But he has the best strikeout rate on this entire slate, and he's actually been over 6 strikeouts every game so far part of the season, including 3 being number 7. And that could propel him to being a pretty solid option today. Now, I don't expect like a 30 fantasy point game, but I think in the mid 20s is definitely possible. There are a couple one offs for Colorado, but he's definitely somebody that I'm going to consider on some of my rosters today. Looking at Baltimore and the LA Angels, for Baltimore, Suarez uh, uh, has uh, had a first game against Minnesota that did okay. Now, he didn't get a lot of strikeouts, and his strikeout rate is really low right now. I don't expect him to have a good game here. I do think LA Angels have some upside from a stacking perspective, but they are kind of risky. That said, he's not somebody that I'm really going to pay too much attention to as he's not got much upside. Now, Detmers has started the season absolutely fantastic. Now, he had a rougher game against Tampa Bay. The strikeout rate is really what's getting him over the edge now. He's the third highest price on the slate, but he's also tied with Case as being the only guys over 6 strikeout potential today. In fact, they're both over 6.5. So I think they're both viable options, and that's definitely going to be one way that I might try to make a couple lineups with Case and Detmers. That said, Detmers does have a tough matchup, and Baltimore is pretty good. However, he did have a solid game against them already so far this season with 23 fantasy points and 7 strikeouts. I think he's definitely capable of that. Obviously, he does have some ups and downs throughout the season last year, so he's definitely carries some risk here, but I do like the matchup for him, and he's definitely a good GPP play on the slate. Like I said, there's not any guys that just jump off the page as great plays, so there's a lot of good GPPs, but not a lot of nothing much else. Looking at Wynn and Quintana for the New York Mets San Francisco game. Now, this game does feature the lowest total on the slate. It also features the lowest strikeout rates on the slate for this particular game, so this is kind of an annoying thing. I think both these pitchers are capable of scoring 15 or so fantasy points against the other, but I don't necessarily like either one. I don't like it much of the batters on either team either, though, so I do think the Mets have a little bit more upside in this one from a batting perspective against Wynn, but I do think Quintana does have some potential against San Francisco as they are pretty weak so far, but I do think both teams don't score a ton of runs, but I don't think the pitchers get a ton of total points either because of their lack of strikeouts. Strikeouts are important in DFS, and if you don't get a guy that gets a lot of strikeouts, it's going to be hard to score a lot of fantasy points. Looking at the catchers here, what's getting those bats? So my top overall play here is going to be Campazano for the Padres. Obviously, this game being in Colorado is going to have a lot of upside situation here as this is a great matchup. And he's got good metrics here. He's also cheap and he helps you pay up other positions. So he is a great play on this one. He's one of my favorite plays to be frank. Even though catcher is pretty deep today, I do think he's a solid option. Now, if you like Kansas City a little bit today, and you want to go against Kikuchi, then Perez is going to be a good value play, though he's a little bit more expensive than Campazano. He's going to be popular anyway because he's really hit the ball well to start the season and definitely looks pretty good. I like a one-off option with Contreras for St. Louis here as well. He's hit the ball pretty well. He's also scored some good fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 games, and that definitely gives him some upside. And then I also wanted to mention Travis d'Arnaud for Atlanta. He has been absolutely phenomenal the last couple games that he's actually drawn the start. So, I mean, if you look at these home runs he's been getting, he's been absolutely phenomenal. So I like him if he ends up drawing the start today. And if that's the case, then he'll be somebody I'm going to try to roster as well. One downside is you can only put one of these guys. So I do think they're all viable, though, and have home run potential. I also like Freddie Fermin as kind of a Hail Mary play at this position, being a dirt cheap option for Kansas City, but he definitely carries a lot of risks today. Well, yeah, first baseman. We're gonna start with Vlad Jr. Now Vlad has been um, a little bit of a struggle to start the season, but he's got a good matchup here, and he's also a little bit cheaper today. And I do like his upside in this metric. And this matchup is his metrics are off the charts. Salvador Perez, who I already mentioned at first, catcher can also swing in here at first base, and that might be a good strategy today because of his price point and the fact that he's a cheap option compared to the other options here at this position. Obviously, Matt Olson is going to have a lot of potential today. He's not been great to start the year, but and he is pricey, so he's going to be hard to roster. But he's got absolutely fantastic metrics for this game. I also think Mountcastle for Baltimore is a very interesting play if you want to stack up against uh, Detmers, and he would definitely be my top pick from that team. And then kind of a Hail Mary play would be Carrillo for Minnesota, as he's had some good games so far this season, and he draws some really good GPP upside. Looking at our second baseman, I do like Xander a lot today for San Diego. He definitely draws really good metrics for this game. He is pricey, and he has not hit the ball well. But man, Colorado can be a place where you can really take off, and so he's definitely somebody I like quite a bit on the slate. I also like Edward Julian for Minnesota is kind of a one-off option. I know Minnesota is not going to be super popular to stack or anything, but they have some guys that can get some hits occasionally, and he's one of the better options today from just a pure metrics perspective. But I do like Brendan Donovan for the St. Louis as another value play. Now he's struggled to start the year as well, but he's had some hits a few games, and he does have some potential here. He needs to get out of the slump he's in, but this is a good situation for him, and so I think he's a viable option. Nolan Gorman is also in a similar situation. He's also been struggling, but he does have that home run upside today, and if you were to go with the St. Louis stack, then you could go with either one of those guys. Then we'll look at third base. Manny Machado jumps off the page here. He can also play third base or shortstop. He's got a great matchup here in Colorado. Obviously, Colorado can be fun. Austin Riley is also an option today. Now, he has not hit a lot of home runs yet, and he's really kind of struggled at the plate, but he does strike out sometimes. But I do think he's a viable option today. But I really like Guy Rosario for San Diego. If he ends up drawing a start today, he's going to be somebody that I'll probably try to fit in the lineup. His metrics are off the chart for this game, and so I really do like his potential here. But we got to make sure he ends up in the starting lineup. Two alternatives you could go with Makil, uh, Garcia for Kansas City. He looks like a good one-off option. He's not hit the ball particularly well to start the year, but he does have that home run upside today. And then Ryan McMahon is probably the only guy from Colorado that I do like a lot today, as his metrics are fantastic, and he's hit the ball extremely well to start the year. Uh, and he is capable of home run at home, as pretty much anybody on Colorado is, because it's a lot easier to hit them there. Looking at Manny Machado at shortstop is also a top option, but Bobby Witt Jr. has been fantastic uh, uh, for the Kansas City Royals, and he is extremely expensive, but he is viable today. He does draw some good metrics here. Kim for San Diego is one of my favorite value plays at this position. Now, he's a little bit pricier today than he has been, which is a little concern, but this matchup is really good, and he's probably one of my favorite plays when it comes to shortstop, especially because it's just hard to roster cheap options here, and he's one of the better options on the slate. Bichette, also very interesting today. Now, he's really been inconsistent so far this season, but he does come in and draw favorable matchup in certain situations, and this is definitely one of them. And I also like Garcia as a kind of a Hail Mary option for Atlanta as a cheap play. He's hit the ball very well. He's not got a huge amount of home run upside, but he definitely can get on base and do things, and that's what you want here. Looking at outfielders, Acuna and Tatis Jr. are the top two guys, and then Corbin Carroll is also a great play, but a good value play today at this position is Profar for San Diego. Assuming he gets to the starting lineup, he's got the best metrics of any value play that I could find on the slate, and he is somebody that I'm probably going to try to fit in my rosters, assuming he draws a start. He just looks really good today. Azokar for San Diego, also very interesting on the slate. He's not hit a home run yet this season, but this fantasy upside today is really good. He's got a good, value play and kind of a Hail Mary play in that from that front from his price. Helps you pay up at other positions. Looking at Brendan Nemo, he has struggled to start the season, but he does draw good metrics for this game, and I do like his upside here. Brendan Donovan, who I already mentioned, can play here in the outfield as well. Starling Marte in a Met stack with Marte and Nemo, I do think that that's a viable way to go today, as they do have some upside in this one. There's just not too many guys from the Mets I like, but those two are basically the best ones. And he's been hitting the ball pretty well, and he does have some home run upside in this one. Lars Nootbaar can also play here at St. Louis for St. Louis. That St. Louis stack is definitely going to be contrarian, but there's definitely a three-player stack you could kind of fit together today. Then we'll look at Alex Kirilloff, who can also play at first base. He can also fit up here in outfield. I also like Santander. Santander has been inconsistent, but if you want to stack up the Baltimore Orioles, then one guy to do that is going to be Santander. Now he's definitely a contrarian play, but he's definitely interesting. Duvall for Atlanta is a very good value play today. He has struggled to start the season, but he does have some good metrics for this one if he draws a start. Buxton has also struggled this season, but he definitely has good metrics in this game again. Hopefully, he can start hitting the ball like a good player. He's just been really inconsistent. Varsho for Toronto is a good play for Toronto. I do like a Toronto stack today, and Varsho is definitely somebody that I would fit in that, especially with his price being so cheap. Velasquez is somebody I also like from Kansas City. Now, obviously, the Kansas City stack is somewhat risky. He's probably the fourth guy on that stack, but he's definitely interesting at his price point. And then Merrill for San Diego also has some interest if he ends up in the starting lineup, as he's hit the ball very well to start the year. His fantasy upside is probably a little bit lower than some of the other guys. But as for cheap punt plays, we have a few of those, and Azokar is one of them. I also like Mateo as a cheap play at $2,400. Freddie Furman, who I mentioned at catcher, is somebody that you could go cheap on. Willie Castro for Minnesota has some potential today. Hampson, for Kansas City is also somebody I would look at as a cheap value play. And then if Austin Hayes actually gets in the starting lineup, he would and comes back from injury, he would be somebody that I would consider. With that said, let's look at our stacks now. So let me pull that up here. So here's what I got stack wise on the slate. We do like the San Diego stack the best, obviously, in Colorado. So that's going to be our top overall stack. Now, our good contrarian options are the Atlanta and Arizona stacks. Now, I do like all three of these stacks. They're pretty expensive. Though you can get cheap with San Diego because a lot of the great plays like Campesino and Kim are both, and Egal Rosario for that matter, are cheap, and that definitely gives us some potential today. Obviously the Atlanta and Arizona stacks are pretty expensive, but there's a couple of cheaper options on Atlanta that makes that stack viable. The righties also get a boost in that game. In fact, the top two games in San Diego and Atlanta, both those games, the righties are getting a boost for those teams. As for the next two, Arizona and Toronto both get a boost to the lefties, and Arizona stack is relatively small today, but they do have some upside in the top four guys. But that is kind of a risky stack here. The Toronto stack I do like more with Varsho and Vlad Jr. and Springer and Biggio and Kiermaier. I think that's a really good stack. And with the lefty boost, that's definitely going to be something I like. Looking at St. Louis, that's also a stackable team with Donovan, Dubar, Arenado. Now, I don't think you want to go too deep outside of these five guys, but they definitely have potential today. Two contrarian stacks would be Baltimore and Kansas City, and these are two stacks that I think have some upside, especially with Mountcastle, Santander, Hayes, Mateo, McCann, and Westberg there from Baltimore all have some good upside. And in Kansas City, the righties get a nice boost. So Garcia, Perez, Witt Jr., Velasquez, Hampson, and then Furman all have utility. If we look at the cheap stacks, I don't love many of these stacks, but if I don't think that the Miami and the LA Ace stacks are terrible, but they definitely risky today. This Minnesota stack will get a boost to the lefties, and that definitely has some potential. I do think the Mets have some potential as well, though they are kind of a short stack, though that you could fit in Nemo Marte and even the cheap ass catcher for them, and that would definitely give you some potential. Looking at Colorado and San Francisco, these are both relatively avoidable stacks, but they do have some potential. And then for the Chicago White Sox, that's a pretty avoidable stack, but if you want to just have a couple one-offs, and those are the type of guys that you would want to consider. With that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions,